Peter, you were telling us about some examples of GDPR being demonstrated to happen, such as good documentation and training programs. What other sort of measures and examples can you give to our sort of viewers?
There are some other measures actually that are referred to in the GDPR, and I think it's taking the protection of data across the business and embedding it. In other words, embedding your measures. It's quite important that you think about data from the outset. And one of the concepts that they've introduced in the GDPR is this concept of data protection by design and default.
Right.
And basically that concept is that you're building in transparency and protection of data throughout all your systems. And some examples of the design there would be just thinking about minimising the sort of data that you hold, thinking about it in advance. Quite often businesses, they collect data for one reason, and as a subset of that, for better or worse, they're collecting all sorts of additional data, which may not be needed. So you should think about that in advance when you put something on a website and you ask for information. What is it that you actually need? Is there anything superfluous in there? So it's a concept of data minimisation, really, that you should think about. Another thing that you can build in quite often is pseudonymisation. So in other words, you may be collecting data for a purpose, but to try and protect it, you will actually pseudonymise it and ensure that it's not easily identifiable to the individual. So that's another measure by design that you're trying to protect the data. You should be able to, sometimes you can allow individuals to monitor their data. I mean, again, that's a design issue. So, for example, if you're a bank, for example, and you've got an online system and you've collected data about an individual, it should be reasonable to allow the individual to go onto the website and actually see all the data that you've got about them. So that's a monitoring. It's built into the design of the data protection of that business. And and that can mean they don't need to submit a formal a subject access request, because they can just go online, look at the data, and ensure it's accurate. And of course, building in security is key. That is important as well. Again, it's another design issue. So you should think about that from the offset, really, with any system. I mean, it goes further than that, though, quite often. If a business is looking at sensitive data, for example, which under the GDPR they call special categories of data. Right. Similar to the current Data Protection Act, that sort of data is where it's relevant to religious beliefs, political opinions, health records, sexual orientation, criminal records, and so on. That's regarded as special categories of data. Now, if you're actually processing data of that nature, the GDPR now requires you to conduct what's called a data impact assessment. Sometimes it's called a privacy impact assessment. And also, not only if you're using processing sensitive data, but also if you're developing a new system. So you might be developing a new website where you'll be collecting data. In those instances, you must conduct this data impact assessment or privacy impact assessment. So what does that mean? Well, again, it's part of the transparency and embedding of data protection into your systems, because it means thinking about that from the offset. So if you've got a project to introduce new technology, GDPR requires you now to conduct a privacy impact assessment. So that means considering what the data is you're collecting, how sensitive it is, what the risks are to that individual if the data wasn't protected. It might be a legal issue, or it might impact the freedom, or some other high risk factor impacting the individual. New technology, if you're developing a new system, so privacy by design default says you must at the outset think about the security of that system. So the privacy impact assessment would look at that from the outset. So it could be quite a big project if you're implementing a new system. That is a big obligation, so that many companies of a fair size will be required to conduct.
And I can see that's going to take some thinking about, because that's something new, and like pseudonymization that you were saying before, it's not it's not like people have been doing that much beforehand, is it?
It's not. No, I mean, I think it's particularly, I believe, applicable to, let's take for example, software providers and application providers that will want to sell that to businesses. As processors, they'll have an obligation to meet GDPR. The businesses themselves will have an obligation to meet GDPR. So it's very much important that at the outset they think about these issues. What's going to be, how they're going to gain consent online, if it's online, how are they going to ensure that adequate privacy notice that meets all that, and how they're going to ensure that there's adequate security. All these issues would be part and parcel of a privacy impact assessment. And as I say, that is obliged to be undertaken now under GDPR.
Thank you.